Welcome, everyone. I'm Laura Lewis, and I'm on the marketing team here at Progress for our Kinvey and Health Cloud products. It's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar, Digital Transformation and the Modern App Factory. Today, we have a highly regarded guest speaker with us. Maribel Lopez is a technology industry analyst and a strategic advisor at Lopez Research. She's the author of Right Time Experiences, Driving Revenue with Mobile and Big Data, and the co-founder of the Emerging Technology Council. Maribel helps companies understand and navigate digital transformation by analyzing today's most powerful technology trends, including mobile, cloud, big data analytics, and IoT. Her clients include firms of all sizes, from startups through Fortune 500 companies. You'll also be hearing from Margaret Rimler today, Vice President of Product Marketing at Progress, towards the end of today's webinar. Please join me in welcoming Maribel.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm so excited to be here today to talk about digital transformation and the role of the modern app factory. So we have a very simple agenda today. I want to talk a little bit about changes in the marketplace, how app platforms can decrease development time and cost, and what are some of the next steps that you as organizations on the phone should consider as you move into this landscape? So to kick it off, let's talk a little bit about the market landscape. So my guess is that you're attending the webinar because you're wondering, what do I need to do to be successful in today's era of rapid change and digital transformation? So from where I sit, it's truly an amazing time to be in the tech industry. I've been running a market research and strategy firm for 10 years, and really I've never seen more enthusiasm in the space. Every organization I speak with has some type of workplace transformation efforts going on, and really technology is at the heart of these transformations. So over the past several years, I feel like we've been bombarded with these terms, wave after wave of technology innovations. We've had mobile, we've had social, we've had cloud computing, big data. Now we have machine learning and analytics and VR and AR. And it can be a bit overwhelming, but what I can tell you for certain is that digital transformation isn't just a buzzword. Whether it's to improve the customer experience, make your employees more efficient, or find new ways of delivering value to your clients with new digital products, every organization I talk to has some form of digital transformation underway. And, we're even seeing that digital native companies are faced with a rapidly changing technology landscape, and they're looking for ways to use new technologies. Maybe these could be things such as artificial intelligence or augmented reality to deliver new experiences and competitive advantage. So it's really an exciting time in the market, and in some ways a confusing time. And there's no doubt in anybody's mind, I think at this point, in 2018, you would not build a product or a service that couldn't be mobile enabled. So mobile has been a key driver of transformation across every industry. From where I sit, I see that it's changed what we connect in terms of devices. It's changed how we connect in terms of the rise of the app economy, new UX and design patterns. It's also changed the way we're engaging with both our customers and our employees. It's allowed us to have more one-to-one relationships. It's provided new data such as location and sensor data and accelerometers and new image capture, and lots of new ways to engage. So mobile is a critical foundation in B2C industries for branding, engagement, customer support, commerce. It's also very critical in a B2B or B2E segment where we're seeing people try to take their existing business processes and workflows and really enhance them with mobile and allow work anywhere and make people much more efficient. So in addition to mobile, we've seen that companies are embracing cloud. So cloud has fundamentally changed the art of what's possible because it offers the ability for small and large companies alike to access really robust infrastructure, robust scalable computing infrastructure. And it's moved just beyond, servers and storage. We now have a selection of platform as a service tools that can be used to support application development, to build new apps and experiences. And we can go everywhere from spinning up new server capacity and VMs to purchasing full-scale applications in the cloud. So clearly cloud has been a big change for organizations, and mobile and cloud together is extremely impactful. So our research is now showing that established and even conservative IT leaders have shifted from saying a no way to cloud to really thinking about building multi-cloud strategies, where some things are on-prem, some things are in hybrid cloud, some things are in private clouds, public clouds. There's like a million different ways of saying cloud, but there's a lot of opportunity with that. And 3/4 of the companies we interviewed plan for broader adoption of cloud in 2018. So it's clear that both mobile and cloud are going to play critical roles in your application strategies. And we're seeing that there's a big workplace transformation. I think in our personal lives, we're all very aware of what's happened with the rise of the app economy. But I think even in our professional lives, we're now seeing this overall discussion of what does a modern digital workplace look like. So 80% of the CIOs we interviewed said that digital workplace technologies such as mobility, collaboration, app modernization, the move to Windows 10, they're all on the agenda for 2018 improvements. We're seeing over half the companies that we interviewed have app modernization strategies to support working anywhere from any device, and that 65% are supporting BYOD, which means they're looking at different types of devices and different operating systems, which also presents an interesting challenge around how do you mobile enable the business. So really, we're at this point where apps are the foundation for an agile business, for better customer experience, for faster access for data for employees, for the ability to share information with partners and deliver these new experiences. So why are you all on the phone? I think that you are all on the phone because you basically want to build apps that matter. You want to build apps that have an impact. You really want to build modern experiences. Companies are building strategies that are leveraging a combination of technologies such as mobile, cloud computing, some of that data that we're getting in the analytics to basically deliver new insights and new experiences. You simply can't run a competitive business today if you're not mobile. You can't scale and shift models easily without cloud computing. And you can't deliver new insights without embracing new ways of collecting data and analyzing data. But to really digitally transform businesses, we've got to move beyond what I see as simply replicating our old existing processes of the past. Application modernization, mobile enabling, really requires creating better modern experiences for your employees, customers, and partners. And these are things that I call right-time experiences. And right-time experiences are basically delivering the right information or service to the right person or entity if it's a machine-to-machine IoT type of application. So basically right info, right person, device of choice at the right time. And this requires a lot of interesting finessing. But having said that, we've seen companies that are both in the old world and the new world deliver these fabulous, new, engaging, right-time experiences. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's take digital health innovation. Think of something like temperature. How we've taken temperature and measured it has been roughly the same for over 100 years. And for many patients, we see that temperature is the most important vital sign, yet we're still measuring it every 4 to 6 hours. We might forget to measure it. If you go home and you're trying to monitor these things, it's become complex. So TempTrack developed a wireless continuous temperature monitor. It's in the form of this one-time use disposable patch. And it can transmit real-time data to electronic health records and enable things like centralized monitoring. And so if you look at this, it helps clinicians produce better patient outcomes, higher patient satisfaction, and generate cost savings with things such as outpatient monitoring, and really just changes how we think about the modernization of temperature. And that's one example of an IoT solution coupled with a mobile device and cloud and connectivity back to an organization. So that's in digital health. But what about something like the movie industry? And how do you use an application to deliver a new way of engaging with your customers? So if you take the literary phenomenon of 50 Shades of Grey, that is now being turned into a movie that has come out in theaters. And when Universal Pictures thought of this, they partnered with their digital agency to develop what they considered a long-term digital strategy to engage movie fans, build excitement for the film release. They developed an internship program at Grey Enterprises, encouraging fans to become ambassadors for the film, creating a more customizable, rewarding messaging experience that fans could share, and leveraging things like movie trailers and digital content. You pull all this together, and this has allowed the company to achieve some of the highest pre-sale ticket sales of any R-rated movie, according to Fandango. So a really great success story of leveraging apps to engage customers. Okay, so those are a lot of B2C examples. Let's look at what's happening in business to employee. One of the things that we've seen is very interesting is there's been a proliferation of apps in the enterprise, or a proliferation even of micro apps. So you've got this dashboard of work apps. So how do you basically create an effective workflow and process in this new multi-app world? Well, there's the opportunity to create an app if you're thinking about the types of things an executive could do. They could be approving expenses in Concur. They could be managing HR solutions in Workday. They could be setting up calendars and schedules and meetings. There's a wide range of things that they could be doing in terms of approvals. So if you look at what VMware did, they decided to put together an app called vApprove, and it uses RESTful APIs to aggregate approvals from cloud services and their internal backend systems. And each request includes a complete workflow of the request, including who else has to sign off, comments, receipts, any of those things that you need. So really simplifying the process and allowing somebody to get their work done in the most efficient way possible, but also in a way that is intuitive and easy. So that's one example of how you might look at a business-to-employee app. But we're seeing a lot happening with mobile and field service as an example. So if you look at Bell & Howell, what would you want to try to achieve in a field service app? Well, you basically want to deliver a great user experience, despite the fact that you might be tapping into a legacy ERP system where the performance might be very long. And you also have a scenario where people are everywhere. Perhaps they don't have connectivity. You don't want their app to be dead in the water. You want to enable offline situational access to applications. So you want to be able to increase the representative's efficiency by using all the smartphone features. Now if you're in field service, you can actually snap a photograph of what you delivered, the condition of an item. You can pop into a video chat. You can do barcode scanning. So there's just a wide range of things that you can do to improve the efficiency and modernize the experience in field service. So these are a couple of examples of how we see companies, building these apps that matter, delivering these right time experiences. But, this is actually not without its challenges. I think when people think about mobile or apps in general and they talk about usability, we originally started with this concept of design and look. But there's actually a couple of categories of challenges that we need to think about. We have what we call front-end issues, and that's where, it's ugly. But, it could also be that it doesn't act like a native app. It's difficult to navigate and complex. If you have multiple people building apps, you get inconsistent looks and feels across different applications from using different developers, different tools. So that's one category, sort of front-end issues. Then I call them infrastructure and development tool issues is another one. So performance testing, analytics around crash, engagement. You have authentication and security challenges. How do you make sure it's easy for people to log in, whether it's B2C with sort of that style of tool or something like an Active Directory that might be what you use to allow your employees back into your organization. So you've got to make sure you've navigated that whole thing. You might have, siloed organizations that, have multiple tools that have duplicated efforts and duplicated cost, and your apps might have slow performance, or you have insufficient infrastructure to scale if you have a wildly popular app. Like imagine if you were someone like Pokemon Go and you went from, 0 to 60 within a matter of days in terms of your app use. So you have to think about these infrastructure issues. And then there's back-end integration. There could be things like you have limited access to your systems of engagement or systems of record, or you have no APIs for your partners to work with you and build out. So clearly, there's a lot of things we need to think about when we're building apps that matter. So let's talk a little bit about how we should navigate this challenge. I've spoken to a lot of companies about their digital transformation, their app transformation roadmap. A lot of them today lack a strategy. So there's a disconnect, but it presents a huge opportunity for those of you on the webcast to build a strategy to address the concerns we just talked about. And I believe that there are at least 3 critical steps that you should consider that help you get to this, apps that matter concept that we're talking about. And I think that the first one, while it sounds extremely obvious, is critically important. And this is aligning with the business. So you have to look at what the key KPIs are for the year and prioritize your app development based on those key KPIs, because that's going to allow you to get some executive buy-in, which brings you to the second part, which is you need business evangelists to help you figure out what apps are most important to those KPIs, that help support testing, and that really evangelize adoption. And then you're going to want to build these cross-functional teams to help support the DevOps. And don't forget, if you don't really prioritize the apps based on the KPIs, you're probably not going to get funding for it. So all these things have to kind of come into alignment. So assuming you've done that, that has given you some semblance of how do you categorize apps. And why is categorizing apps important is what I've seen is you may start with, maybe it's a few mobile apps that you've started with, or maybe it's one major app modernization project. Next thing you know, you're staring down a pipeline of 150 to 200 apps, because lots of organizations have thousands of apps. Now, we could debate whether or not they're real apps or how to do that, but all of a sudden you've had a floodgate that opens. So in order to tame the floodgate, you align with the business, and then once you've figured out what the different types of apps and categorization is, that leads you into how would I consider development for these apps? Do I have to take this app and do a full-on rewrite of it because it's extremely important and strategic to the business and will differentiate us? Do I just refactor an app and maybe pull in data from a couple of different data sources, reuse, or do I replace an app or sunset an app? I could replace it with a SaaS app. I could replace it with the custom build. So there's some choices around how you do the modernization. And based on the app and what the app needs to do and how strategic it is to the business, you'll pick one of these strategies. And if you get to the part where you've picked a bunch where you're like, okay, these are strategic. We are going to write these for the new world, assuming things like mobile, assuming things like cloud. How do you do that? So then you have to start thinking about how do I embrace an app factory approach? And the third step to me here about App Factory, it's really a combined set of philosophies and tools. So it changes the way you think about app development. Legacy systems can't achieve the same goals that we need today. We're talking about rapid development, rapid iteration, perhaps a wholesale change of the app. And that's leading us from, what might have been waterfall to people doing Agile, and now to people doing DevOps with sprints and cross-functional teams. So that's sort of a philosophical change in how you think about apps. And, assuming that you're on board with that, then you have to think of, well, how do you set up a way of development that moves from everything being a custom one-off design to a more scalable approach and process to app development, more like a factory, but not the old Henry Ford style factory that produced, one model of a black car at a certain time frame. You're designing a new state-of-the-art factory, and it's an approach that allows you to scale and shift to meet market demands. Now, to me, part of this concept of moving to an app factory means that we have to embrace app platforms as a foundation for agile business. And why would we want to embrace app platforms? I think it's the old adage that we had of, better, faster, cheaper. And normally you could only get, any two of those. It could be better and faster, but not cheaper. It could be, cheaper and faster, but not better. And I think that the goal of an app platform is to allow you to do all three of those simultaneously. So what kinds of things are we thinking about when I say app platform? So we're thinking about a combination of front-end and back-end tools. So front-end development tools support third-party and open-source integrated development environments. These are tools and frameworks. Then you have back-end tools for the enterprise that allow you to access data that's on-premise, cloud-connected data, other resources, could be considered legacy systems of record, could be considered databases, any of those types of things. And this concept of your front-end tools and your back-end tools combined together to allow you to do things like offline use cases. It should have things like documentation, code samples, templates. It should have the back-end integration hooks I just mentioned so that you can get to, your Hadoop, your SQL, your SAP, whatever it is you might want to connect to. Should give you some things that are necessary but not differentiators in terms of functions like push notifications as an example, or locationing services. You want to make sure it has app analytics so that you don't just want to drive performance, you also want to drive engagement, and analytics are critical for both of those. Authentication, access to data stores, perhaps even some content management so that you can actually keep some of that content there if you don't want to have it residing in certain databases. And all this needs to be done in a way that has enterprise-grade security. It needs to be scalable. It needs to be manageable. And this is one of the reasons why you're looking at possibly doing a platform instead of rolling it all yourself. So to me, I look at this division of I spend money on things that drive differentiation, and I leverage cloud tools, platforms for things that are essential that I need to scale, but don't differentiate me. And one of the interesting things that we've seen that is a change in the marketplace right now is that as we've moved on in time, we have front-end tools, we have back-end tools, and we actually have some companies that can provide you a range of front-end and back-end tools. And you get your option to choose, I can do front-end from here, back-end from here, I can do front-end and back-end from one person together. So it really depends on, what you've been using, what types of apps you have been applying. But the nice thing about this change in the marketplace is that it allows you to have an integrated suite so that you're less of a systems integrator, which, we've seen many organizations overwhelmed with the scope and quantity of tools they have to master. So not to mention the challenge of managing multiple vendor contracts, different pricing, and if any of those tools end up on a different, schedule in terms of how they're updated, it might change the way you do your development. So there's lots of great tools that are available. There's lots of great promise, and now there's actually promise that you can buy integrated toolkits together to even scale faster. So that's been a great shift in the industry. And one of the reasons that you're looking at app platforms and thinking about scale is that you're trying to build cross-platform. You want to have native-like experiences, but to the most part, use one code base to support multiple platforms, use one set of tools and features so that you can figure out, how to scale that development across the organization. The other thing that I think app platforms provide that's very critical is this concept of performance analytics. So you can't build apps that matter if they are crashing or perform poorly. And I consider that the, entryway into an app. It has to perform. So you need uptime, crash frequency, app responsiveness. And there are many things that could get in the way of that. You could have a great app, but it fails when it goes to hit a database and no data is returned. And this leads you from having a 5-star app to a 1-star app in a consumer space, or it leads you to having no adoption of the process in the enterprise space. And it just ends up you wasted money at the end of the day, money and time. The other thing that you want to do is we got really enamored with this concept of driving downloads for a while. And now I think people realize that downloads is not the same as engagement. So it's important to have analytics around how people are engaging with the app. Are they clicking? Are they staying a long time? Are they making purchases? What kind of fallout is it? So all of this is really an important thing to have, and you can get some of that through a platform. And then everything we do right now is so mired with the issue of security. I think one of the things that is extremely important for organizations is to make sure that you have testing to see if there are any code vulnerabilities, and you want to minimize the vulnerability in your code. So instead of trying to add security after the fact, you want to pull that process in earlier. You also, which means that you can also reduce data leakage within your existing apps, but a lot of people are going to unsanctioned apps, and if you built better apps, they would use your apps instead of using third parties, and you don't know where your data is going, which is really important for compliance in a lot of organizations. And when we're looking at connecting to back-end systems, we need to make sure that whatever we're using as a platform is secure and that it can protect the data that we're connecting to. And then finally, I mentioned earlier, we were talking about using logins. How do you provide the appropriate logins for users without needing to know a lot about all the different systems? So I think that is a great opportunity for simplification and for security all at the same time. Now, the other thing I've noticed with platforms is you can get many of these in the cloud, and they are updated in the cloud. And so you're focusing on the app development, not the infrastructure at that point. And I think that's a real critical junction. You're basically getting faster time to infrastructure than if you had to roll out all your own for dev, test, and design. You're also reducing the cost of the infrastructure typically. And even if you aren't reducing the cost of the infrastructure, you're allowing yourself to have huge scalability if and when that might befall you as one of the great benefits of you building a really cool app. And then finally, we see that there is, with the cloud, this concept of continuous updates. If we had gone back 2-3 years ago, nobody was really talking about augmented reality, virtual reality, chat bots, conversational interfaces, conversational commerce. I mean, they were being discussed, but they were more bleeding edge concepts than something we were actually doing. Now you actually need to have platforms that are going to help you support this moving down the road. If you look at what's happening in banking as an example, many financial institutions are now building conversational interfaces to basically drive better engagement and reduce support costs. So very interesting stuff happening there. So we have to think about continuous updates. And then the other thing, I think, depending on what type of company you are, you want to be able to have APIs and hooks and things into your apps and into your data that allow you to build partner ecosystems, because I think that's important for developing these new, engaging, exciting experiences. I thought I would leave you with a few pieces of advice that weren't actually necessarily fully related to the platform, but were important. So one of the things I think you should think about as an organization is unifying your company on a platform so you can get some scalability that I mentioned. The other thing is I have many clients that I deal with that are using third parties to develop their apps. And that's great, but you want to make sure that your systems integrator is aligned with your platform choice and that you're driving the platform choice, not them. Because if you want to move to another SI, you want to be able to move your platform. You might not be able to move theirs. And then if you go from them designing it to you maintaining it, you need to understand those tools. So I think that's really important. Then obviously people love clouds but change clouds or have multiple clouds. And so that means, a cloud agnostic platform is important. And finally, I think starting small and iterating often, regardless of what type of development model or platform you've chosen, is really important. We're no longer in the boil the ocean stage here. So having said that, I want to make sure that everybody realizes we're starting small, we're moving fast. So in closing, maybe a few other key thoughts. You're at the front line of change right now. It's a very exciting time with the new technologies, and you have the opportunity to be the bearer of ideas and technology to help your company and your customers achieve their goals. So it's time for all of us to stretch maybe a bit beyond our comfort zones. It's time for you to learn as much as you can about how to enable transformation with scalable application architecture and a scalable design model. And finally, I think you need to organize for continuous innovation, which is very exciting. So with that, if you would like to reach me, here are my contact details. And at this point, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Margaret Rimler from Progress, and she's going to describe a bit how Progress's technology fits into this concept of what I was calling the modern app factory. Margaret, over to you.
Thank you, Maribel. Those are some great insights and considerations for the digital transformation journey. As you consider what's required for successful digital transformation, you have several choices to make, and one of the key choices is which type of application development platform you're going to use. And as Maribel pointed out, you have a couple alternatives, and so what we'd like to do is go through some of those alternatives. You could what we call DIY on a cloud platform, and that's really stitching together cloud services to create your own application development platform. And to us, a good analogy for this is like building a car from piece parts in your garage. You could do it, but why would you want to do it? The other alternative is to execute in a state-of-the-art application development factory. And so let's take a closer look at what executing in a type of factory like this can do for your app delivery. With DIY on the cloud, you need to set up and manage VMs and storage. You'll need to add and configure services and develop and maintain the glue between those services. You'll need to ensure that you have the proper security, encryption, and compliance needs to meet your enterprise requirements. And then you actually have to write the integrations to your enterprise systems and authentication sources. All of these need to be done before you even start development of your actual application. And these activities can add time, risk, and cause delays to your projects. And each one of these individual cloud services are typically priced separately and often use a different usage-based metric, such as CPU usage, storage gigabytes, API calls, and such. And this can add to very unpredictable costs as you move into production. And all of this I would put into the non-value added side of the equation when you're looking at your actual application. So if you look at the right-hand side, with Progress Convey and a state-of-the-art app development factory, you can log in and start developing immediately. There's no assembly required. There's no infrastructure to set up, secure, manage, or keep up to date. And all of the services are covered by one predictable price with one contract and one enterprise SLA. So let's take a closer look at what's under the hood of this application factory. For front-end development tools, we can start with 13 different development tools and frameworks that give you the flexibility to use the development tools of your choice. The most recent addition to our SDK family is support for NativeScript, which is an open source framework. And the framework allows native iOS and Android applications to be delivered with one single code base, which really streamlines your development efforts and reduces your overall TCO. So if you haven't considered a front-end development tool, you might want to look into NativeScript. On the back end, we have over 20 fully integrated cloud-based services that are on demand. And we have a set of no-code and low-code data and authentication integration services that are easy to use, are secure, and very high-performing. And the platform provides built-in end-to-end security and compliance, the operational intelligence, and the end-user analytics that Maribel identified as being so important. So I wanted to give you some insight into the 20+ integrated services that we have on the cloud. And these, again, can run on the cloud of your choice, which is nice if you have to move your services and want to have some choice in the marketplace. I'm not going to bore you by going through each service today, but as you can see, it's a comprehensive list of features and capabilities that are really needed to deliver the modern mobile, web, and smart device applications today. And we keep these updated on a continuous basis, not only for patches and fixes and updates and functionality, but also for new features that are delivered to the market, such as the chat bots, and recently we've added our live service for real-time data delivery. So the best part also is that our dev team keeps and manages all these services for you, so you can focus on your app and your user experience and not worry about these non-value-added development efforts. We are very honored to let you know that we've been named a leader and the top-ranked current offering in the Forrester Wave for mobile development platforms. So this was really great because Forrester has a rigorous evaluation process, and I really recommend that you download this report. I put the link here. Download the report. It's also on our website. And take that and look at the criteria and use that as part of your research for defining the types of capabilities that you need in your application development platform. One of the things we hear from the prospects when we go out and talk with them is that their current approach of DIY, whether it's on the cloud or even on premises in their data center, it's resulting in protracted application development cycles, some of them upwards of 12 to 18 months for mission-critical applications. With Progress Convey, our customers are able to deliver high-quality applications very quickly. A functional proof of concept can be delivered in days or weeks, and a mission-critical application can be delivered in months. We also give our customers the ability to iterate, update their apps very, very quickly, which allows them to respond to user feedback and be able to drive up their ratings to 5 stars quickly. So hopefully this discussion has piqued your interest and shown you that successful apps, are now easy to deliver when you use an app factory such as Progress Convey. Many of our customers, as we've talked about, achieve 5-star ratings very quickly because of their ability to be agile and respond to feedback. With our platform, we're giving them the ability to deliver their apps 75% faster, and we've been able to deliver them more than a 60% lower cost of ownership while still accessing their enterprise systems very simply, quickly, and with a high-performing data access. So this is our straightforward value proposition to our customers, and I hope it's something that you guys are interested in and would love to learn more about. To that end, I invite you to check out our savings calculator and you see how much time and money that you're going to be able to save while delivering world-class applications. You can get a quick idea by running through the calculator very quickly, or it has very, very detailed calculations that you can dive into and modify them for your particular situation. So again, I highly recommend visiting the site and checking out what savings of time and money are possible with an application development platform such as Convey. So this concludes our presentation, and now I'd like to open it up for questions. First question is for Maribel. And so Maribel, at what stage are most people or most organizations in their journey, in their digital transformation journey? Where are they, if you had a bell curve, where would you put most people today?
I think most people are in, they've obviously done their first couple of apps at least, so we're headed towards the middle. And I think what we've looked at is people have done a lot of work where they've tried to get the first several really critical apps up and running, and they've hit a point where it's not quite scalable because they need to move from, say, 5 to 10 apps to 100 apps or more, depending on the type of organization. So we've all gone through Gen 1.0. A lot of organizations on the more leading edge have gone through Gen 2 and 3. But I'd say if we looked at a 4 to 5 gen process, most people are moving between 2 and 3 and are just trying to get to the concept of how do I scale and where do I scale and how can I think differently about the total DevOps platform. How do I think differently about organizing? How do I think differently about picking tools? How often do I need to change tools? Things of that nature.
Okay, great. I think I'll ask my own follow-up question then in relation to that. You said a lot of people are at the stage where they're trying to scale. What are some of the challenges that they're running into as they're trying to scale?
So I think one of the challenges that a lot of organizations run into is, are groups within the organization building their own apps? Is there an IT app development group that's doing one thing and then a bunch of other groups that are doing different things? So you get a lot of inconsistency of tools. You get a lot of inconsistency in terms of user interface. And then you actually have a lot of challenges connecting into the back-end systems that are going to provide the data to make these systems transactional. So frequently what happens is people stand up whole apps using either a third party cloud tool or working with an SI, and then they come to the point where they need to make their app transactional and dip into databases, dip into ERP systems, financial systems, and then they're like, oh, can't get there because they don't have the right folks. So that's another challenge that we see a lot of companies dealing with. And then, of course, the basic challenge of figuring out what do you do first, which doesn't really have a lot to do with tools, but has a lot to do with thinking of how do you really build the things that make the most sense for an organization. And then I think there's, I guess I would also follow up and say, I think that there's a challenge where there's front-end tools and there's back-end tools, right? As people are spending a lot of time trying to figure out which of these they want to use, and different developers have different perspectives, specifically on front-end tools more than back-end tools. So I think it's important that you have an environment that allows you to select the right front-end tools that your developers want.
Okay, great. Here's a quick hitter for me. It says, what clouds does Convey run on? So Convey is cloud portable, and we run on the three largest clouds out there, Amazon Web Services, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. So I think we pretty much have the market covered in terms of cloud platforms that we support. Let's see, another question for me on how do we price our platforms? So as I said during the webinar, we price it on a per app basis. So everything's all included. You don't have to worry about individual services like storage or CPU usage or API calls. It's one price for per app. And then if you're a larger enterprise and would like to run multiple apps, then we can talk about sort of like an ELA or platform pricing to be able to satisfy that need as well. Okay, I have another one here for Maribel. You've given us a lot to think about. If we're just starting on this venture, where should we start? What's the first thing we should do?
Interesting. Okay, so back to one of my earlier questions or comments was, I think the first thing you should do is figure out what are going to be the apps that matter, because that actually has a lot to do with figuring out what kind of tools you're going to use, what kind of databases and applications, legacy applications, or even modern cloud applications that you're going to be connecting to. I think that's the first step. Then I think you need to decide if this is going to be a experience that's going to tap into multiple things, or are you just trying to get a quick hit up and running? So basically figure out what your application is, and then once you know what your applications are and what data resources it's going to tap into, you have to decide what your front end is going to look like and how you're going to do the back end integration. And there are actually a lot of different front end tools that people are looking at, and a handful of back-end integration tools. I see one in the portal around, it just came in, or I just saw it now, around the concept of vendor lock-in. And I think this is actually a really interesting concept that a lot of people struggle with. And I think there's always this yin and yang effect, right? If you want something to be highly integrated and highly useful, a lot of it typically comes from one vendor, and so then you worry about vendor lock-in. And what I would say is that when you're looking at a tool choice, you're probably looking at a tool choice that's going to last you a couple of years. Does that mean that that tool will go away? Not necessarily, but I think your timeline that you're looking at for any given tool set in this really dynamic environment is probably several years. So in that time frame, you have to think about what you're going to do to scale, which aspects of that are going to be open source or not. I think you also have to look at when you're selecting a vendor, is the vendor a startup or established vendor, or have they been acquired by established vendor, just so you can get some sense of what the longevity of the vendor might be in the landscape. And assuming that you're comfortable with the fact that, they have what I would call the right mix of open source versus not, and the right mix of long-standing vendor, then I think you can place a bet within that time frame that we talked about. And you should always be reevaluating, like, what are the new tools that are coming into the landscape? How do I perhaps integrate some of those tools? What is my existing vendor doing? Talk to them about their roadmap. And you got to be comfortable with their roadmap. And if they have a good roadmap, then you can feel confident with selecting someone, even though there might be this risk of what we would consider a vendor lock-in. Hope that helps.
Awesome. So I'm just looking at some of these other questions here. There's a question around Xamarin and any thoughts on Xamarin. And at Progress Convey, we are a big supporter of Xamarin, and so we provide a SDK for the Xamarin, front-end development, and that SDK provides a lot of great features for Xamarin in terms of data encryption, online-offline operation, data sync, network management. So we're full supporters of the Xamarin, and we think it's a great platform. So feel free to use Xamarin on Convey, and I think you'll have great applications. All right, well, I think that concludes our webinar, and we really appreciate you participating. It looks like a lot of you stayed on for the full webinar, so I'm very excited. I think this is a great topic, and I look forward to a series of these kinds of discussions from us. Thank you very much.
Those were all great questions, and I want to thank everyone for submitting them. I'd also like to thank Maribel for joining us today to share her knowledge. We hoped you enjoyed the event and look forward to having you on future Progress webinars. Be sure to check out our previous presentations and follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.